Okay, the recording is started, and we're good.
Tova to everyone. A good year under very trying circumstances, I must say. This holiday was unusual. Let's hope next year it's easier.
Right.
So we are about to try to understand a few things. First of all, the machlokas of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai in the Mishnah, and second of all, where Rabbi fits into the picture, because the Mishnah doesn't specify which case the argument of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is referring to. As if you read the Mishnah as an independent document, and we didn't have the Gemarra to elucidate and to misdirect us, and the Gemarra would not have its pathway in understanding the Mishnah, which of course the sages of the Gemarra were the eventual arbiters of the Mishnah, and the ones who told us what Rabbi's intentions were when he wrote the Mishnah. Those are all funneled to us through the eyes of the Amoraim. But Rabbi is clearly not an early Amora, a midpoint Amora. So Rabbi already has precedence in the line of the tradition that the halacha was like Beis Hillel, yes, because at the time of the arguments between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, although we don't really know when they took place, and we don't really know how long they persevered, we do know that the halacha in the end, the halacha was like Beis Hillel, not like Beis Shammai in the very large majority of cases. That assumption means that Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, who argue in this Mishnah, the halacha would be like Beis Hillel, and the halacha would not be like Rabbi Akiva, even though he was an antecedent, but the halacha would not be like Rabbi Akiva. Why? Anybody?
He was a Yochid?
Because he was a Yochid, right? Rabbi Akiva is quoted in the Mishnah as a Yochid. And of course, we have to understand why Rabbi bothered to quote him. That's a separate issue. But Rabbi Akiva is a Yochid. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai are two schools of Jewish thought of halacha. And the halacha would certainly not be like Rabbi Akiva, because the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva mechaveiro. If there's a machlokas with Rabbi Akiva and any one of his chaverim, any one of the Tanoim who lived or who was quoted as arguing with him, halacha is like Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is authoritative in the formulation of the halacha. I think of it as funnels. There are funnel people. There are people who the halacha passed through them, and the halacha was refined by them, and the definition of what the Torah meant in its psukim was funneled through them, and then the funnel widened in multiple opinions again, and then narrowed again. So the Jewish history, it looks like this. right? It has funnels and widening and funnels and widening all the way through history. Of course, the first of the great funnels was Moshe Rabbeinu, who funneled the Torah and its concepts from HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. But nevertheless, he was a funnel. And that's what the Mishnah means to tell you when it says Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. Moshe was Mekabel, whatever a human could hold, could contain about Torah's Hashem. Oh, I'll speak lots of years of speeches. There's a concept in the universe. It's called Torah's Hashem. David HaMelech says Torah's Hashem Tmima, Meshivas Nafesh. The Torah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Tmima. It's completely wholesome. It's Meshivas. It's Meshiv Nefesh. It's soothing to the soul. It replenishes the soul. That Torah is unknown to man. It's Torah's Hashem. That's the Torah that the rabbis say was existing 2,000 years before the world was created. It's only a number. There's no such thing. But it's a very long amount of time before the world was created. Torah's Hashem existed. Moshe Rabbeinu came and took it from Shamayim, and all the midrashim that talk about the angels arguing with him. It's not for man, it's for us, it's for in Shamayim. Torah's Hashem stayed in Shamayim. But Moshe brought Torah's Moshe. Those HaTorah Shesam Moshe Lifnei Bnei Yisrael. This is what Moshe was able to receive, and so he funneled. He created a narrowing, as it were. He created a decrease in quality of the purity of the Torah, because the purity of the Torah is unable to be understood in the human mind. So whatever was able to be grasped by Moshe Rabbeinu was grasped by Moshe Rabbeinu, and he passed it down through Yehoshua, and we had a widening of the funnel in many, many years of the Shoftim, until the Shmuel Hanavi, who concentrated the Torah again and created the Tekufa of the Nevi'im, where it widened again, and at the end of the Tekufa of the Nevi'im, we have the Tekufa of the Anshe Knesset Hagdola. Shimon HaTzadik was such a person, and the largest of them, the next funnel person was Ezra. So the Ezra, we people here today don't have a concept of what the Torah looked like pre-Ezra. Our Torah is really Ezra's Torah, and Ezra is the ultimate funnel person who all the previous generations funneled through when the Jews came back from Bavel after the first Churban. And so Ezra is really pre-Ezra. We don't know what the ksav of the Torah really looked like. We don't know many, many halachas in the way that the Torah was observed. We don't know what an esrog looked like. We don't know what tefillin looked like. We don't know. Anybody who tells you they know, it's a wonderful thing to have emunah and chachamim. It's correct, but the real emunah and chachamim is the emunah that Ezra transmitted the Torah in a way that was aligned with the intention of Moshe Rabbeinu. Not that the Torah looked like Moshe's Torah before Ezra lived. That's not what it was about. And the symbol of that, the physical representation of that is that the letters of the Torah themselves changed when Ezra came to be. And Ezra was Mesakin, the Ksav, what we call Ksav Ashuris. Ezra was Mesakin, the Assyrian form of the letters of the Torah, which probably didn't sound like the letters that were predated it, and certainly didn't look like the letters that predated it. There were some similarities, but the form, the halacha of how we write our letters is the halacha of Ezra, who was the one who counted the Sofer, He was the one who counted the letters of the Torah. And the reason he counted them is because the replacement letters are the same number of letters that were in the Torah in the first, when the Torah was given, but the form of the letters is not the form of the letters of the Torah that was given. So when Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai had their argument and they divided, it says, the Gemarra records that it was almost as if the Jews had two religions. There was the Shammai religion and there was the Hillel religion. Of course, that's not the first time in the history of Judaism that there were two religions, but that was a fundamental split in the. Now, what makes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel's different than either the antecedents, the predecessors of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, the Tzdukim? What makes them different is that the pronouncement at the time of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai about the nature of their disagreement was Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. Elu ve'elu divrei, about Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai's argument, it says Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. About the argument of the Tzedukim and the Perushim, of the Karaites, of many of the other sects, some later, some earlier, that existed, you don't have Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. You had, this is the Mesorah, and this is not the Mesorah. This is the way the Mesorah traveled, and this is not the way the Mesorah traveled. But Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai was Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim Chaim. The both of those formulations were viable transmissions of the Torah that they received from their teachers. Both of them were viable, and either of them could have been the future of the Jewish people. But since Beis Hillel was a Mekil, and the words of the Torah are always given, the intention of the Torah is always to make light easier, more simple, more practicable for the Jewish people. So the halacha went to Beis Hillel. Now, when Rabbi lives, which is generations after Hillel, and the halacha was Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim Chaim, both of them are HaKadosh Baruch Hu's word of the living God. But nevertheless, the halacha is like Beis Hillel. So does Rabbi in his statements, does Rabbi in his pronouncements that he made here agree with Beis Hillel, or does he agree with Beis Shammai? And the Gemarra is going to, after the Gemarra explores the machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, the Gemarra is going to look to explore who Rabbi holds like. Because, again, Rabbi lived generations after the halacha was decided, like Beis Hillel. So how could he, in fact, paskin like Beis Shammai? Could Rabbi be a Shammaiite? The Shammaites stopped, they ceased after the halacha was paskin like Beis Hillel, and the Jews united around the halacha of Hillel, even the Shammaites. It's not such a simple story in Jewish history, because there were there were at least two of the descendants of Hillel, Rabbi Gamliel, to be specific, who was Hillel's grandson, that Rabbi Gamliel, who was a Shammaiite. But put that aside for the moment. Leave that alone for the moment. The halacha was like Beis Hillel, and Rabba certainly, by the time Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who was the 8th generation to Hillel, and he sealed the Mishnah, and he sealed the halacha, and he was another funnel person, because the halacha always is the way Rabbi made the halacha in the Mishnah. So Rabbi was a great vessel of funneling the halacha into the generations that existed after his time, which again was 8 generations after Hillel himself existed. And just for a time period, you should know that Hillel lived 100 years before the Churban, and in that time period, in 150, There are arguments about exactly when he existed, because he had shilas about the Churban that were allegedly proposed to him. So, but in the Churban, in the time of the second Churban, Hillel lived. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi lived 8 generations later. He lived, give or take, in the year 250. So the Churban was 70, yes, AD, and Rabbi Yehuda lived 250. So he lived 200 years after his antecedent of 8 generations. And if you look at the generations, it's give or take, it's 25 years a generation, and 8 generations later, Rabbi Yehuda came onto the scene, give or take. So when Rabbah comes, again, if you look at the Mishnah, as Rabbi Yehuda quotes the Mishnah, as Rabbi Yehuda lays out the Mishnah, so the Mishnah says, "Hasholeach yod b'pikadon," somebody who was a sholeach. I'm sorry, I'm refreshing us, but it's relevant to the. I don't know if that whole talk was relevant, but this piece is relevant to the continuation of the Gemarra. So anyway, it's good to go over how things happen in Jewish history, I think. So if you look at the Mishnah in its uninterpreted form by the Gemarra, and you look at the Mishnah in its continuum from our previous Mishnayos, the Mishnayos seem to be working in order of different things that were put in the hands of people to watch. And we started with grain and losable things and animals, and then we went to the last Mishnah, money, and now we go to the violation of the Mishnah now we begin to talk about the violations. Hasholeach yod b'pikadon. Somebody who has a pikadon, we don't care which kind, which variety, and somebody is a sholeach yad b'pikadon. Somebody violates. So the Beis Shammai says Yeloka bechoser or beyeser. Beis Shammai says you pay the highest price. Beis Hillel says you pay the price at the time that it went out of the world. And Rabbi Akiva says you pay the price at the time of the teviyah, of the legal. I'm not going to define it. Of the legal process. When in the legal process, we'll discuss. But he says it's the legal process that sets the value of the pikadon. So in this Mishnah, what happened to the what's the nature of the pikadon? What's the status of that object that was given, that the shomer was a sholeach yadin? What's the status of the object?
Are we still in the Mishnah?
Yes. Well, we're pushing into Rabbah, and then we'll go to Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. But what's the status of the object in the Mishnah? Where's Jack?
Is it stolen? Oh.
He's there. We haven't seen him yet. The object is no longer available to be returned to the owner in its original form.
Good. The object is no longer here. Correct. So if the object is no longer here, what's the next question you have to ask?
When did it become no longer here?
Or does that matter when it became no longer here? It's just no longer here.
No, it's a good question. But it's, one step past the next progression of logical questions, or at least it seems to me. What's the question before that question, Rabbi? Dr. Flug, what's the question before that question?
Did the person who was sholeach yad, did that person cause it no longer to be here?
Good. Right, that's the case. I'm not interested in the case. We want the theory. The theory is, how did it become?
Why does that matter? Once he's sholeach yad, it's gone. However, it's gone is
excellent.
It's gone.
Excellent.
We want to know what its value is. How much he has to pay, but But
you want to know how much he has to pay, but when is it, how it disappeared? Is it of interest to us or not? That's the fluke.
it is, but I still don't like that it is.
No, Dr. Flu.
It matters because you want to know at what point the transaction happened. So, that might determine what point the Kenyan happened.
Don't do that. What did you just did something that is not in the boundaries of this discussion. What did you do? What did you superimpose on the Mishnah?
That there's some sort of Kenyan.
You superimposed on the Mishnah that you understand how the object was lost. Don't superimpose that. When the Mishnah says, when Rabbi wrote that Beis Shammai says you pay the greater and the lesser, what's the only qualifier of that statement, Mr. Liss?
There had to be a change in value.
No, that's not the qualifier. That's true. By the way, you're not right. You're not wrong. It's true that there had to be a change in value, but that's not the qualifier that the Mishnah puts on the case of it's no longer here. Rabbi Bila says it's no longer here. That's what we're dealing with. The case of the Mishnah says the Pekadon is no longer here. It's not in this world. But
and they can't give it back to him in the same condition.
That's what Rabbi Bila says. You can't give it back to him. So it's no longer here. But what's the only qualifier of the Mishnah?
Whether it wouldn't have been there even if he hadn't taken
it. No, it's not about the object. The qualifier is Hasholeach Yad B'Pikadon. The Mishnah says he was a Sholeach Yad. That's the only qualifier in the Mishnah.
Okay.
The right? You see? That's what it says. I can't superimpose on the Mishnah anything other than what the Mishnah says at this moment. And the Mishnah at this moment says, Hasholeach Yad B'Pikadon. If somebody is a Sholeach Yad in the Pikadon, if somebody violates the Pikadon, says Beis Shammai, he pays the higher price. Says Beis Hillel, he pays the price at the time it was going out of the world, whatever that means. And says Rabbi Akiva, you pay the price at the time of the legal maneuverings, whatever they are. Those are the three opinions. But the qualifier is only one qualifier. Hasholeach Yad B'Pikadon. You have to violate the B'Pikadon. Now, go to Rabbah's statement. And what does Rabbah say about Rabbah comes immediately after the Mishnah. Amar Rabbah, right. Yeah? Or Rabbah.
He equates Sholeach Yad here with being a Gazlan. Or suggests that he might be a Gazlan.
Okay, good. Okay. So Sholeach Yad is a Gazlan, but what does Rabbah do? What does Rabbah insert into the argument, into the case of his Gazlan? Good. A Sholeach Yad is equivalent to a Gazlan. Very nice. And I'm not sure it's exactly equivalent to a Gazlan, because as Mr. Liss said 2 weeks ago, a Sholeach Yad is a person who, when he received the object initially, received it with permission, received it with the consent of the owner, and the Gazlan never received the object with the consent of the owner. Nevertheless, says Rabbah, what does Rabbah do to make a delineation in the case of a Gazlan, which will assume that because that case is listed as the first case that follows this Mishnah, we can assume that Rabbah didn't just, in Yiddish, at the Nishgeret for hits, he didn't have a fever, and all of a sudden he came with a blitz that he says, oh, a gazlan, we assume that when Rabbi talks about the gazlan, the reason he's talking about a gazlan is because a sholeach yad is a version of a gazlan, and the same rule that would apply to a gazlan would apply to a sholeach yad. But what does Rabbi insert into the situation?
And it depends how it happened, whether it's
Right.
broke.
Right. Rava inserts into the situation that it's not such a blanket case. It's not such a blanket case. If the person broke it or drank it, then you pay one thing. And if it broke by itself, you pay a zuz. Except what's the precondition of Rabba's case? What is the precondition?
It was stolen.
Yes, but that's the similarity Rabbi Bila says between the sholeach yad and a thief. What's the precondition?
So it's no longer
Again?
here.
That's true. It's that whereas the assumption here is it's no longer here. You'll see Rashi says in a very interesting way. But what's the precondition that Rabbi? There is another precondition that Rava's case is based upon.
That he could have returned it before the
Go ahead.
destruction happened.
For sure. In any case, in all cases, you can always do that. But that's not the precondition of Rabbi.
Not the change in price, is it?
Yes, of course it's the change in price. Look at the case. Meikara shavyu zuzah. At the beginning, it was worth a zuz.
Right.
The hashta shavya arba zuzah, and now it's worth 4 zuzim. So what's the precondition to Rabba's statement? What is he lays ground rules for you. He's telling you, listen, the Mishnah doesn't talk to you about how the barrel broke, whether it broke by itself, whether it didn't break. We can assume the Mishnah is talking about a case where the barrel is no longer here,
Right.
where the pikadon is no longer here. Yes, we can assume that, because if the pikadon was here, you know that even if he was a sholeach yad, Dr. Flug's issue of whether he's responsible for the money or responsible to return the pikadon, and does that give him ownership in the pikadon, in the stolen object or not, is a different question. But that object is no longer here, and that object is an object according to Rabba's delineation. That object is an object that increased in value. It was once worth a zuz, now it's worth 4 zuz. We don't know when the once was, and we don't know when the now is. Yes? Meikara. From the beginning, Rabbi says. At the beginning, it was worth a zuz. Nehashta now, you know.
Right. You don't know whether Me'ikara is when the person first acquired it or when
Beautiful.
Yad. You don't know which time it is.
Beautiful. Exactly. You don't know the definition of Me'ikara. All you know is that Me'ikara means before. Once upon a time, it was worth a zuz. Now it's worth 4 zuz. All this, does the Mishnah talk about that case?
No.
No. Does the Mishnah talk about how the barrel was broken, or how the object is no longer in the world?
No, just that
No.
it's gone.
Okay, so we have 2 conditions that are placed through Rabba. We have 2 conditions that are placed through him on what appears to be something that's similar to the case of the Mishnah, namely a ganef, because apparently he's equating a sholeach yad to a ganef. Yes? Okay. Apparently he's making that comparison. Otherwise, what's he doing talking in this Mishnah? Let him talk in the Mishnah that talks about a ganovim. What is he talking about a ganef over here? He must let him go talk about in Gozel Kama. Let him go talk about in the parak about Gazlanim. Let him go talk about it there. But he talks about it over here. So we assume that Rabbah is making a statement about the Mishnah that preceded him. So, however, what he does is he adds two new conditions to his case of a ganav. One, that the value was increased, which the Mishnah says nothing about, and the other one is that how the barrel broke itself.
Well, the Mishnah does imply that when it says b'chaser v'yeser.
Oh, good, but good.
That shows
Very
there's a
good.
change.
Good. The Mishnah implies that there's a change, but good. So when Beis Shammai says b'chaser v'yeser, does it? That's nice. When Beis Shammai says b'chaser v'yeser, what? Again, no biases now. Only your understanding of the Mishnah as it is raw. When Beis Shammai says you pay the higher value, what does Beis Shammai mean, Mr. Ryback? What does Beis Shammai mean? You pay the higher value. What does it mean?
You're muted, Shelley. Shelley, you're muted.
Anybody? What does it mean? What does he mean? You pay the higher value.
All right, Shelley, now we can hear you if you want to answer.
What does it mean?
It had to be at the value of some time, but we don't know exactly what time period yet.
That's one thing. That's good.
But it could have increased or decreased.
Beautiful. Whether it increased or decreased. There's no Beis Shammai's halacha is irrelevant about it's unconnected to whether the value of the pikadon rose or sank. What about Rabba's value? What about Rabba's case?
Is Rabba's case directly what he says? Is it addressed to what the Mishnah says?
Beautiful.
Or does the Gemarra bring something from somewhere else where Rabba makes the statement in a completely different context? So really, is he commenting on the Mishnah or not?
Well, it's always the disadvantage. The first quote is the one you think that's going to be rejected anyway. Otherwise the Gemarra would be much shorter.
Yeah, but if you look in the we cheat, right? We're always cheating. If you look at the statement of the Gemarra Amar Rabba, yes, you'll see that the halacha is like Rabba. Yes, the hay. You see the hay? Hay man. You see the little hay before the hay?
Yeah, but this is a Gemarra that comes from Baba Kama. There's a site there, Baba Kama, right? Samachay, I think it is.
Whatever.
I don't know. Whatever. I don't know what the context of Rabba's statement is. So whoever put the Gemarra together is now bringing a statement from Rabba from left field, and we're trying to analyze the Mishnah from a statement made in a different context.
Beautiful. So let's assume everything you said is right. What conclusion do you have to reach about the editor of the Gemarra, Ravina, Ravashi, whoever? What?
That there's obviously a relevance or a connection between what Rabba said in the Mishnah.
Or Ravina's drunk. Either way, right? Yeah. If there's no connection, if this is above, that's what I said, if this is above a Kama Gemarra, and the Gemarra is not relevant to this Mishnah, then why did the Gemarra come? Why did Ravina and Ravashi, when they redacted the Gemarra, come and bring this Mishnah, this statement of Rabbah, who is an Amora, a clear Amora, whether it was Rava or Rabbah, it doesn't matter. Rabbah and Rabbi Yosef, Rava and Abaya, it doesn't matter. But what is this statement doing here? If it's here, it must mean all the things that we've been saying about, like Rabbi Bila said, that the Gazlan is equivalent to a Sholeach Yad. And therefore, once the Mishnah says HaSholeach Yad B'Pikadon, that's automatically a Gazlan. And once that's a Gazlan, you have Rabbah, and then Rabbah slides right into the picture because Rabbah's talking about a Gazlan. The basis of the Gemarra was a Gemarra in Bava Kama, that's okay, so long as that Gemarra in Bava Kama is relevant to this Mishnah. And what is the and of course we want to understand is okay, the other way. Is it simple that a Gazlan and a Sholeach Yad would be equated? Is that a simple conclusion?
No, but it's not. But you don't necessarily have to be equating them in every aspect of the law. You could just be equating them in the kinyan that they make on the object.
You equate them in the responsibility that they have.
Ooh, okay. Good. Dr. Flug, why did you pick the kinyan?
Because that's what we're trying to get at here is, the value and the timing. So that's, that's really the crux of the question here is at what point does the Sholeach Yad or the Gazlan take possession?
Is that unclear in your mind?
Sure. That's the I think that's the whole question that Rob is trying to
again, I understand that you learned the Gemarra. It's pouring out of all your pores that you learned the Gemarra.
No, but it's the Mishnah too. It's not.
1 second. You 1 second. You can't superimpose. That's what you did before. You can't if you're going to give me a second here. Let me.
You want to see that Rambam?
What?
You want to see that Rambam or no?
It's fine with me. But 1 second. When you are a Talmud Chacham and you learned, you went through, you learned, you really learned well, Shas. When you learn the 100th time this daf, what approach would you take to this piece of Gemarra? And in fact, that it says Eino Doma, there's no comparison between the learning of a person on the 100th time than the 101st time. There's no comparison. Why is that there's no comparison between 100 times and 100? You said you learned 4 times 2 is 8. You chaz it over 8 times 2, 2 times 4 is 8, and 4 times 2 is 8, and 2 times 4 is 8, and 4 times 2 is 8. And for all of elementary school, they gave you in the 4th grade multiplication table, and you learned 6 times 2 is 12, and 4 times 2 is 8. 2 times 6 is 12, and 2 times 4 is 8. And you learned it again and again and again. Did something happen between the time you learned 2 times 4 is 8 in the 4th grade and today when you learn about 2 times 4? Did something change in your tfisa, in the conceptual understanding of 4 times 2? Did something change? Nobody's brave tonight, huh? The answer is,
I'm not sure where this is headed.
I know. That's why nobody wants to answer. The answer is hopefully something changed. The answer is hopefully something changed. That the 2 times 4 that you learned by rote when you were in the 4th grade has a different conceptual meaning to you than it had when you learned 2 times 4 is 8. That you understand what 4 as units means, and what multiplication means, and what 2 means, and how those numbers relate to each other. And that might deepen, if you were a mathematician, that might deepen greatly over the time you really learned math and learned the real depth of what a positive 4 is and what a multiplication means and what 2 means, all those things. But when you learn the Gemarra 100 times, if you learn the same way you learned in the 4th grade, 4 times 2 is 8, and 8, then 2 times 4 is 8. Then what you do is you carve a pathway in your thinking about how the Gemarra is channeling your thoughts, which I always tell you is what the Gemarra does. It channels your thoughts, and all you do is you're like water. There's a channel, there's a groove, there's a riverbed, and all you're doing is flowing with the riverbed. You never learn how to understand that the river didn't have to go that way. You never learn how to understand that the riverbed is not necessarily carved in stone and that it could move if the water flows a lot. It's the same thing with the Gemarra. If you learn the Gemarra the way the Gemarra wanted you to learn it, every time you learn it, and you don't take a look at the material with fresh eyes like you never saw it before, which is very hard to do because you learned it 100 times, 4 times 2. You learned it 100 times. So your proclivity is going to be, that's the way it is. But the Gemarra doesn't want you to learn that way. And the rabbis didn't want you to learn that way. The rabbis want you, when you open the Gemarra and you see a Mishnah, you now have, what's the difference between the 100th time and the 101st time? The difference between the 100th time and the 101st time is you now have a much better context in which to understand things. The tools that you use, your ability to read, your ability to comprehend the meaning, your ability to understand what Beis Shammai was like in his totality. Every argument of Beis Shammai in Shas, every day of Beis Hillel, every difference, it gives you a world view of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai that you didn't have unless you learn again and again and again. Oh, remember Shammai over there? He said that. That's similar to what he said over here. That opinion is similar to this opinion. All those things do improve. But when you look at the Gemarra and you see the Gemarra's intention, and you see and you approach a Gemarra, you have to do it as if your eyes never saw it before, and then layer on all the information. But you miss a whole hand in it if you aren't able to see it like it was before. So when Rabbi says that there are 2 inserted values here that are not listed in the Mishnah, namely how the object was broken or lost, how it went out of the world, yes, and the fact that it now is worth more than it was before. So if we look at just those 2 insertions, is there something we can say about the statement of Rabbi and who he in the Mishnah would agree with or disagree with? Because again, true that Beis Shammai spoke about you pay the higher price, but Beis Shammai's higher price is both ways, whether the object gained in price or lost in price. What's Rabba's opinion if the object lost value?
Seems to be closer to Hillel to me.
1 second, don't jump. What's Rabba's opinion? What's Rabba's opinion about if the object lost value?
He doesn't say.
He doesn't say. He clearly doesn't say what his opinion is if the object lost its value. So you don't know.
As opposed to Shammai, who says there's an up or a down.
As opposed to Shammai, who is indiscriminate and says that whether the object was up or down, he pays the higher price. And we said that the word is yiloka. So that higher price that he pays is punitive. It's not the halacha. It's not it might not be in Shammai's eyes that the pure replacement value that should be paid, it might be a penalty, because the word he uses is yiloka. He's penalized with a higher and lower price. If you're penalized with a higher and lower price, does that mean that that's the letter of the law? Does that mean that that's the meter of justice? Is a penalty? What is it? What is the nature of a penalty?
Penalty is that it's not what you would have come to the conclusion based on past experience. It's something else because
Not past experience.
Not past experience.
It's not based on the logic of the situation. A penalty is not based on the logic of the situation. What's the purpose of a penalty?
You think it's a deterrent, but
exactly. A penalty is a deterrent. A penalty is a way of making sure that violation isn't repeated, not by the person who violated and not by anybody who saw him violate. That's the nature of a penalty.
And Shammai never mentions a factor of time. Shammai only mentions a factor of value.
Exactly. Shammai never talks about, no, he never talks, not only time, he only talks about that. Yeah, we spoke about that originally. Mr. Reinstein had his idea of the machlokas between Shammai and Hillel. Right, but that's true. Shammai doesn't talk about time or the moment of, Shammai doesn't care about the moment of the valuation. Shammai cares about the fact that a ganef, a sholeach yad, has to be penalized to the maximum ability that he can be penalized, to the maximum value whatever could have been. The maximum value. That's all he's interested in. Irrelevant of when and how and if it got cheaper or if it got more expensive. If it got cheaper, he pays at the time. If it got cheaper, he pays at the time he was stolen. If it got more expensive, he pays at the time of the return or the time he used it. Penalty, not halacha. Not din.
I'm assuming, let's say the guy who owned it originally was a speculator, and he assumed that this thing was going to go up to a value of 10. And the thing got destroyed when it was only valued at 4. But based on his insight into the Picadon market,
right,
he had a feeling it was going to go up to 10, but now he's only getting 1 or 4 for it.
Right, good. So what's the answer to that idea? He's being penalized by the loss of, he believed it would be more valuable. He's being penalized now because it was destroyed at 4. What's the rejoinder?
You can never prove that it would have been 10.
Even more than that. You can't prove, you're right. You could never prove it's going to be 10. But let's say it goes to 10 later on. But the rejoinder is, if you want to secure the value of your object in a speculative way in a market, it doesn't matter if it's a market or not. But if you want to secure the value of your object, don't give it to a shomer. You made a choice. You knew when you gave that object to the shomer, and that's what it means, be'atera asaliyodeh, that it came to his hand in a way that was permissible. When you gave your object to a shomer of any kind, did your chance of not having that object or its value, did your chance of not having the object, of losing the object and its value, increase or not?
Not necessarily, because you gave it to him for a reason. A reason that maybe you're going away and you wanted to make sure it was secured.
That's your hope. You're right. You gave it for a reason. But I'm asking you about the probability of your not getting back your object. Did it go up or didn't it go up? It went up. Yeah. Because if that shomer's house burned down and your house didn't, you're going to lose the value of your object and it's
And
an
if your
onus,
house burns down and his didn't,
but
or
that's
if the robber walked
but
into
you-
your house
but-
instead of his
but
house,
but you didn't initiate that law, that possibility. You weren't the one who released your object to somebody else and allowed for that possibility. Of course, things can happen in your house.
You can't look at somebody else's house and said, my house burned down, someone else's didn't, therefore I have,
Right.
you can't do
You gave your object to a person who, if something happened to that object, if it was a shomachinam, if it was stolen, that object, you lost your value of that object. You lost it. Was that true in your house? Yes, of course. If it was stolen from your house, it would also be, but it was stolen from his house, not yours. So once you voluntarily and with heter place your object in the house of somebody else, what you're doing is, in a tacit way, you're saying, I am in some way increasing the possibility that my object might not return to me. And if it doesn't return to me, I lose its value under certain circumstances. If somebody was a sholeach yad in a pikadon, what he in effect does is he transfers that object from the possession. This is not clear. This is a big machlokas nachronim. He transfers that object from the possession of the owner into his own possession. When he is a sholeach yad, the same way when you're a ganaf, you take that object from the owner's house and you put it in your possession. And at that moment, as the Gemarra is going to say, Kol hagazlanim mishalmin b'shas hagzela. All ganovim pay at the moment that the gezela happens. That's when the object, that's a Mishnah, by the way, that's when the value of the object, the replacement value of the object is set at the time of the theft. So now let's go to the next layer. If the replacement value is set at the time of the theft, when is a sholeach yad replacing the value? At what moment is he replacing the value of the object? At which moment?
When he becomes a shloach yad.
Good, because since shlichas yad, according to Rava, is equivalent to a ganaf, that moment that he was a sholeach yad, he became a ganaf. And since the ganaf pays at the time of the geneva, and he doesn't pay any other moment, then the moment he's a sholeach yad is the moment that the value of the object is set, the time of the gezela. Yes? If it's the time of the gezela, now layer on the next question that you have to ask Rabbi.
How do you determine the time of the gezela?
Ugh.
You don't like that? I mean, nobody's there except him.
But that's not the theory. That's to determine the time. The theory.
See, who is he going by?
No. It's simple question, simple answer. Simple question, simple answer. What's the next problem with Rabbi? If the time of the theft and the time of the shlichus yad is the same moment, and the Mishnah says the time of the theft is the time that you set the value of the object, what's the problem with Rabbi?
Why do we care how it was destroyed?
Thank you very much. Why does it make a difference how the object was destroyed? The moment he was a sholeach yad is the moment of the gzela, and that's the moment that the object is valued. There is no other moment.
It would never change then.
What do you mean?
Well, it could have changed in his possession. Okay. So any price fluctuation that happens after the gzela at this point is irrelevant.
According to Rabbi.
At this point, right? According to Rabbi.
According to Rabbi, and Rabbi only talks about ascending value, 1 to 4. Yes, 1 to 4. But he inserts another condition. He inserts another parameter.
He changes the time of the gzela.
So what? Good.
Because he's got to fit a square into a circle.
But that's what he says. He says, no, it really is the time. Really, you go ahead and you pay at the time of the Gezela. And the time of the Gezela really is the time that you were Shaleach Yad, because that was the moment of the violation. Just like a Ganef violates at the time of the Geneva, a Shaleach Yad steals at the time of the Shlichus Yad. So, and then he goes ahead and says, but wait a minute. If the object got more valuable, and he went ahead and then before he stole it, it was one at the moment meikara, whatever that means. At the beginning, it was worth 1. Now it's worth 4. He pays the 4. Why does he pay the 4? What does the Rabbi say? Why does he pay the 4? Because that's when the time of the Gzela is. So I ask you again: is the moment of the valuation of the 4 the moment of the Gezela, or is the moment of the Gezela the moment of the Shlichus Yad, of the time he violates the condition?
Depends on if he's comparing it to the Goslin.
Right. So look at Rashi, and you'll see, and we'll read the Rashi. It's a little bit long, but it's quick. It's not a tough Rashi. But what you'll see in the Rashi, and again, the reason I'm going over this is because I want to lay the groundwork for the next iteration in the Gemarra, which is going to talk about, does Rabbi agree with Beis Hillel or Beis Shammai? That's the next, the issue after the next issue is, does Rabbi agree with Beis Hillel or Beis Shammai? But look at Rashi. Di'i Isa, Rashi says.
What's that last word on the line?
Right, because Rabbi says if it was the Isa, because if the object was here, Hadra Lemara Be'ena, he would return it to the owner as it was. And Hahi Shaita the Kashasile, O the Katavala Kagazal Mine. That moment that he drank it or broke it, that's the moment of the theft. So the moment of the Shlichus Yad is, in Rabbi's words, no longer the moment of the theft. The moment of the breaking or of the drinking, that's the moment of the
or when he was Sholeach Yad, but he becomes that Goslin type person when it's no longer here.
So listen to what Rashi says.
Because he was Sholeach Yad.
Wait, look what Rashi says. The Isakan, because if the object was here, B'shas Hatviyah, at the time of the lawsuit, at the time he claimed the object from him, the owner claimed the object from the Shomer, he would give it back as it was. And then the value, whether it increased or decreased, would be irrelevant.
Why does the Ganav suddenly become an honest man now?
He's still a Ganav.
He found it, they came and said, hey, look, the object is in his house. We saw it in his basement. Right? But he is still a Ganav, but he would give back the object as it was. Because when Rabbah says you pay at the time of the stealing, what's the condition that you pay at the time of the stealing? Where the object is no longer existing. Then you pay at the time of the theft. But if the object is here, if the object is present, bein shehukra, bein shehuzla, whether the object became more expensive or the object became less expensive, choseres kemoshi, you return the object exactly the way it is, and the owner gets back his vase. And whether it got more expensive or less expensive is irrelevant. He gave him a vase, he got back a vase. Aval, but if it isn't here, how do you evaluate it? Hilkoch. Now listen to what Rashi says, and here you feel the screw. There's the twist. Hilkoch, therefore, hoel ve'im tova, since if he claimed the object ba'odo kayemes, when the object was still existing, la'achar shehukra, but after it became more valuable, so when the shomer took it, it was worth 1. When the Ganef took it, stole it, it was worth 1. And now it's worth 4. And when he claims it, it's worth 4. If it was here, he would give it back. Ish takach. So what comes, look what, again, Rashi says, since if he would claim it at the time and it was here, Hilkoch, says Rashi, therefore, Ashtakach, it then comes out, it happens, Tahahi Shaita, that moment, the Koshosila, who the Gazala,
that's when he stole
that
it.
moment he drank it, that's the moment he stole it. Now
So why does it matter Itbar Mimela or not then?
Precisely. So you understand.
But Rabbi does this thing.
Of course, you understand that Rashi is convincing himself.
Where's the next Rashi? There's no next Rashi.
There's no next Rashi. Rashi's convincing himself. He's saying, listen, I have a conundrum. It's worth 4. I need to make it. I have a Mishnah that tells me you pay at the time of the theft, and Rabbah says if it's 4, you pay 4. And I have a Mishnah that says you have to pay at the time of the theft. Therefore, 4 must be the time of the theft. It's reasoning backwards.
Rashi's saying more than that. Rashi's saying the only time Misham Kishasa Gazela is if there's no Ba'ain.
It's not true. That's for sure. That's always the case. That's always the case. That's in all cases. The question is, what happens if it's still worth 1? What happens if it didn't break when he broke it? What happens if it broke by itself? It's worth 1. Why? In other words,
that's a good question according to Rashi.
Of course, but don't you see what Rashi has to deal with is the fact that he was a sholeach yad and it stayed the same price, and it was now 1, and he returns it at 1. Is then when was he a sholeach yad? When it was worth 1, he was a sholeach yad.
But he wasn't a Goslin.
He was a Goslin if he was a sholeach yad. No, he was a Goslin because that's the time of the gezela. That's the time of the shlichas yad. But if the object increased in value to 4, when is the time of the shlichus yad?
When he drinks it.
When he drinks it. So when is the time he drank? When is the time of the shlichus yad? When he drank it, or when he? Why does the valuation, the fluctuation in the valuation, change when the time of the shlichus yad is? And that's what all of that.
It's not the value is not affecting that. It's the destruction of the Ba'ain. The value has nothing to do with it. It just you need the value to change in order for it to be manifest practically.
But when do you assess the value?
When the Ba'ain is destroyed, according to Rashi, that's when you assess the value, because that's when the Gezela happens.
If it's destroyed, then it's
Rashi is explaining Rabba. Rashi is not. Rashi's
right. Rashi, according to Rabbi.
Right. Rashi's talking about Rashi feels the tension in Rabba's statement, and he has to say something in order not to make Rabba into a schizophrenic. That if it remains at 1, the time of the shlichus yad is when it's at 1, and if it changes to 4, the time of the shlichus yad is at 4. How could it change the time of the shlichus yad? The time of the shlichus yad is an established time. In fact, I was a sholeach yad at 1:10 on Wednesday afternoon. Gegangen. I wasn't sholeach yad again, but Rabbi says that was the time of the shlichus yad. So you have to do something. You have to construct some type of a mental construct that will allow the shift of the time of the shlichus yad from the time it was worth 1 to the time it was worth 4, and that's what Rashi's struggling to try and do. So other people say the time, the reason that if it gets more, if it becomes more valuable, and and what happens at the time it becomes more valuable is taka, the time of the shlichus yad is the time of 1. That was when he was a sholeach yad. But now we're going to assess a different issue. Mr. Liss mentioned this a few weeks ago. We're going to assess an issue of how much damage that sholeach yad did to the owner. How much damage he did to the owner. And if he broke it when it was 4, then the damage is done to the owner 4. because if he would have taken it at the time he broke it and given it back to the owner would have had 4 zuz. Now he's got none. So what damage did he do? He did an extra 3 zuz of damage. The one that was initially the shlichus yad, and the one that now is the extra damage that was done. So that's what some of the people who are dealing with this try and take that approach. The only problem with that approach is when Rabbi makes his statement, he says the words, Hu de kagazale. That's the time it was stolen. He doesn't say that's the time of the damage. He says that's the time it was stolen. So now you have to think about Rabbi in terms of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. So when Rabbi talks about the change in the value, who is he talking like? Is he talking like Shammai or is he talking like Hillel? What does Hillel hold? Then the question, if the object becomes more valuable, what does Hillel hold? Shammai, we know, holds that you pay the larger value, but it's a knas. What then would Hillel hold, who says you pay at the time of the object's exit from the world? Would you pay 1 or would you pay 4? What if the object became more valuable? What if it became less valuable? How does Rabbah fit in to this metric between the opinion of Shammai and the opinion of Hillel? And that's what the Gemarra is going to explore next. And it'll be much easier, God willing, next week, because all the foundation is now laid to hold the intention of the Gemarra.
Why don't we sit at 4? He pays 1.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Exactly. So they asked the question, Asholeach Yad worse than a Gazlan? Is the Sholeach Yad worse than a Gazlan or not? Is it or not? So from one side, it is. Because not only, what makes a Sholeach, you do it. What makes a Sholeach Yad a person who violates? What makes a Sholeach Yad worse than a Ganav?
He had the trust and he
betrayed the trust. He also, besides that he stole it, he betrayed the trust of the owner.
And then you got my other question was, if he wasn't a shaleach yad and it gets and he has to pay and it had gone down, he was like, well, had I been a shaleach yad, I would pay less.
Right.
So
right. Exactly.
I was paying more because I was doing the right
thing.
So
in other words, what you're asking is, where is the justice? That's what we want to know. Where's the justice? Exactly. Where does justice live? Exactly correct. It's a privilege to be able to learn together. It's a big privilege. I don't take it lightly. It's a huge honor, a huge privilege to be able to learn together, to discuss the Moshe's Torah and the Kadosh Baruch Hu's Torah and halachas like that. And everybody should feel like we're going to have, God willing, a very rich year, rich in nachas, rich in Torah, rich in learning, rich in happiness, rich in yedidus, in caring one person for the other. That's the most wealthy thing in the world. That's where wealth really accumulates.
Thank you, Rabbi. I want to make just a little bit of 2 announcements.